Hi, my name is Eva Steiner, and this is my project Psychotherapists Around the Globe. I am interviewing the psychotherapists around the world and asking them the same 8 questions. I am wondering how mental health profession is in their country. Today we are going to. Thank you for doing this interview with me. Before we start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Of course. Thank you for having me, Eva. I'm so happy to be here. Well, my name is Clara Sancho. I'm an Ecuadorian psychologist, and currently I am working with children and families, which has been my passion since I first studied in the university. I am 29 years old, and I have been living in Quito, in the capital of Ecuador, since I was born. So I'm an Ecuadorian girl, and some years ago I was a teacher in kindergarten and first grade. So for me, it has been a really cool experience working with children. So that's why I chose this path into my professional life as a psychologist. So I love working with children. I love working with families. I don't have any children of my own yet. That's a little bit about myself.
Tell me a little bit about your culture. What is some holiday or tradition that your country celebrates? And if your culture would be an emotion, what emotion would it be?
What can I say about Ecuadorian culture? I think it's very rich and diverse. The country has this blend of indigenous Spanish and African influences, and traditional Ecuadorian customs and traditions vary across every region. So we have the coast, and then you have the highlands, and then you have the Amazon. So you will have different traditions among each different region. But there are some common elements that are central, I think, to our cultural identity, like a lot of festivals and celebrations. So when you asked me about what is one holiday or tradition that our country celebrates, actually, we have a lot. I think as a culture, there's a lot of religion influence. So there's a lot of traditions that are influenced by religion. For example, we just celebrated Easter, which we call Holy Week. For the whole week, there's many different events. For example, one of my favorites, it's called Holy Friday. At the Friday on Easter, we get together with our families and we make soup that is called fanesca. And this soup is very interesting because it has like this religious background, like metaphorically, of course. And they have a lot of grains. So you have a corn and, well, in Ecuador, we have many types of corn. So in this soup, you will get like all the types of corn there and many grains, different grains. And like the tradition says, in this soup, you will have 12 different grains, each from one disciple, like Jesus' disciples. So it's really interesting how all these traditions are usually manifesting in families and in gatherings. So we are a very familiar culture. I mean, in Ecuador, you will see a lot of children going to family gatherings with all the extended family. I mean, you have the grandparents and grandmothers and uncles and aunts and cousins and second cousins. So Ecuadorian is a very familiar culture. So we use these celebrations to usually gather with our family a lot. So we do gather with our families a lot. So you have like the nuclear family, but you also have the extended family. What else can I tell about the culture? We do have a very indigenous heritage. We have a large indigenous population, of course, living outside of the capital, specifically in the Andean region and the Amazon region as well. There's a lot of interesting things that they do very differently as we do in the capital. Like medicine is different, of course, food is different, traditions are very important, and cultural, like heritage, is very important for that population in the country. And we have a lot of amazing food. Depending on where you live, of course, you will find products from the highlands or from the coast and seafood. We have a lot of variety of food as well. I was thinking on your question on if my country would be an emotion, what it would be. And my first thought was joy. It is a very joyful country, but currently Ecuador is also going through a very strong political and security crisis. So my second emotion was fear or insecurity, because we are living in a unprecedented situation where there's a lot of insecurity, a lot of violence going around. So the first one, like my inner child would say joy, and my adult self would say a little bit of fear and surprise as well. There's a lot of things going on right now, and you got the population very surprised, not in a good way.
And fear is just right now or in general fear?
I would say right now, there's a strong insecurity crisis right now. There's a lot of violence, there's gangs, there's a lot of narco trafficking things are going around and political involved. So it's been a little hard these past years for many people. There's many people going, like leaving the country, going to live in some other places. Yeah, I would say for these few past years.
How did you become a psychotherapist in your country, and what is your therapeutic approach?
So I became a psychotherapist by studying clinical psychology in the university. I got my undergraduate degree by completing a 5-year program in psychology. The first 3 years in the program included subjects from general psychology. So you had all the people from the university, from the psychology faculty, studying the 3 years together. And then you get the chance to specialize into one of these 3 fields, either clinical psychology or educational psychology or organizational psychology, to work in some institutions as human resources. I decided to go with clinical psychology, and within that subject, then you would have subjects related to psychotherapy approaches and techniques. I ended up my undergraduate program, and I got the chance to be a psychotherapist because of the formation and the program I had before as a clinical psychology, like specialization inside the program. So my university had a strong influence for the psychodynamic approach. I do work as a psychotherapist from the psychodynamic approach, and I work as a children psychotherapist. Yeah, but I am very oriented to the psychoanalytical theory and technique right now.
Mm-hmm. And do you need any special specialization to work with children, or once you finish, you can choose with what type of population you want to work?
You do need a certification to, I would say it's very important to specialize with children and, let's say, teenager approach, right? So the development of children and teenagers. So you would have more information and technique and approaches to work with this kind of population. So yes, you do need a certification to work with children.
Is there any other way you can become a psychotherapist or work with people in Ecuador besides going to psychology?
Maybe I would say with a social worker approach, but within the health system, like to work with people, you do need to be a psychologist. Even though in Ecuador there's not an institution or organization that regulates that. So of course there's a lot of people like studying something like certificating themselves into, let's say, coaching or something like that. So they do work with people, right? They're not psychologists, but they do work with people from different approaches. So I would say something Ecuador lacks is an institution that regulates the health system, like the mental health system, because there's no regulation in that. So you would have a lot of people saying them like they are psychotherapists or they are psychologists because they maybe had a diploma or they followed a course or they went and studied abroad, but it's not the same as getting the accreditation from the country's educational system. So you would have a lot of people here working with people without any specific certification. Even though if you say like you're a psychologist and you're not, you are getting yourself into a lot of trouble legally. But you would get those people working here. Not with children. I think that psychologists working with children, they do have their certifications like on task, on point. Children work is a little bit more ethical and responsible. And from adult work, I do think there's some people, not a lot, but some people that work with adults from different approaches that are not specifically a psychological approach. But there's no way to become a psychotherapist, I mean, a certified one, if it is not through studying psychology.
And if you say you're a psychologist and you are not, you mentioned you will get in trouble. In what way if there is no law?
That's a very good question. But I do think that specifically working with children, if by any chance, right, let's think about the worst case scenario, but if any chance there's someone that says it's a psychologist and they're not, probably their parents would do something very important, like to legally stop this person from working. There are a lot of like alternative therapies for children with neurological disorders in their development, or there's autism and there's problems in behavior. I mean, there are a lot of therapies besides the, let's say, the traditional psychology or psychotherapy way. But you do need to get some certifications, and parents need to know who are they working with. So when I say there's no institution or organization regulating this, I mean who is working as a psychotherapist, because you don't need a specific or an extra psychotherapy certification to be a psychotherapist. So usually when you finish your clinical psychology career, then you get the chance, legally, of course, to work as a psychotherapist.
Okay, so the third question, how society looks upon psychotherapy or any psychological help?
I think the mental health stigma in the country, in Ecuador, in our society, is decreasing year by year. Of course, it depends. Like I would say, you get this answer a lot, but I would say it depends a lot on the educational factor or the socioeconomical factor for each like micro society we have, right? But if I can speak generally, I would say 50-50. You would get 50% of the population very open about it, getting like their interest on learning more about mental health. Specifically, if we're talking about children's mental health, there's a lot of parents that have worked on themselves to give their children a healthier way of living. But then you get the other 50% of the population where they don't get the help they need, because once again, Ecuador does not have mental health public policy. So you would get a lot of people wanting to reach for help or seeking help psychologically, and you would get a public health system that is very deteriorated, and these people wouldn't get the help. So maybe they would go to seek advice from church or seek advice from other kind of medicine. That's the thing with the society. Most people, I think, would be open to seek for any psychological help, but at the same time you would get a lot of challenges on the way, like to get that help.
So mostly you can get a private help. This is the way I'm hearing you.
You can get help from the public system, but let's say you're having a crisis, an emotional crisis right now, or you're having a depression episode right now, you would get an appointment for 3 months from now. So it's not sustainable for the amount of population that are using the public system. So in Ecuador, you have a lot of inequality. So you would get, that's why I'm saying like this 50-50 vision in my head. Like you have the people that can privately go to schools and can privately educate themselves in these kind of topics, and that can privately seek help from a psychotherapist. And there's some very vast majority of people that need this help publicly, and there's no policies to sustain all of those people.
And do you maybe know what was the stigma regarding mental health?
I would say the traditional stigma that any person that seeks for psychological help is crazy. It's given a lot of drama, or is exaggerating, or life is just hard. Like we just have to get with it. Like life is hard. Everybody has problems. I would say those are like the most common ones that I have heard since I was a children, actually. But of course, studying psychology breaks all of that stigma for me and for the society. I think there's a lot of people that privately are working on breaking this stigma. Like, so mental health matters. You matter. Your feelings matter. You're teaching children a lot about feelings or emotions. So I think that's a very good start.
What is your society teaching about child-parent relationship, and whether these values of society also influence how you design your interventions?
I don't think society is much well aware of the importance of the child-parent relationship. For example, me, I work as a children therapist. Of course, I work with theories about bond and parent-children relationship and how important it is. When I first talked about how Ecuador is going through security crisis, I forgot to mention that as a culture in Ecuador, there's a lot of normalized violence, like a lot. So when you ask me these questions about children or child-parent relationship, I would say there's also very much part of the society that thinks that the way of teaching children how to behave or the way of teaching children how to do the things that adults want them to do is by punishing them. So there's a lot of punishment, there's a lot of verbal abuse, there's a lot of physical abuse that is extremely normalized. I think there's like these voices, a lot of voices raising right now into saying, well, this is like the structure we have known for a long time, but this is not working because look at how people are behaving right now. Like this security and violence crisis we're having, it's not odd. It responds to this kind of caregiving like relationship children have had since forever. Then you have, of course, children being afraid of their parents, and children are not having healthy relationships with their parents. But I would say there's a big part of the society that is raising their voices into trying to break this, like trying to break these patterns, these violence patterns that parents raise their children with. Well, because they were raised like that. So in my case, of course, my intervention also has this view, like this vast view on how this children is raised, or how this teenager was raised, or how this parent that is raising these children was raised. So for me, especially because I work with children and families, there's point number one. It's very fundamental for me to understand this parent and children relationship within their behavior and development and social development and emotional development. So I think society is right now trying to contain and trying to break the patterns, as I said, but also trying to educate parents a lot on how important it is for them to have a healthier way of upbringing their children and breaking the violence patterns they usually have.
And you mentioned that the abuse is normalized, physical abuse is normalized. This is how I understood you. Is also then talking about physical abuse normalized because everybody is doing it?
Yeah, for sure. I'm thinking about an example. This happened to me like last week when I had a session with some parents, and they told me, so my children, this kid is 2 years old, is hitting. And we know that we do not have to hit him, and we do not have to yell or lose control and everything, like, because these parents are parents that work on themselves a lot. Even though they work on themselves like unconsciously, there's this way of them being violented in a way or abused in a way that has been so normalized that the advice they got from their grandparents, it was, you just have to hit the kid. Like, one hit wouldn't mind. Like, stun him, or I don't know, pull his hair, do something about it, because that's the only way children learn. So they came to me and they were like, we're living in this paradox where we know that abuse and violence is not the answer, but why does it work? Why does our kid finally listen to us or stopped the bad behavior he was having? And then, of course, they were questioning themselves, like, is this the way, is this not the way? But we at the end ended up understanding that that's the way they were raised. So there's something very unconscious about that may be related to what are they doing as parents. So yes, there's this, you're always going to find one person in Ecuador that tells you, just hit the kid, it's okay, nothing will happen, you are not going to traumatize this kid, my favorite quote. I was hit as a kid and I am perfectly fine. And I'm like, maybe you're not perfectly fine because you're telling hitting children is okay. So that's where the questioning comes, right? And that's where professional help comes.
What are the learned beliefs regarding client-therapist relationship, and can the relationship continue outside the therapy once the therapy process is over?
I think most people have a lot of questions regarding like the therapeutic process and the psychological approach and what's going to happen and when will they get better? What are you going to do? How much do you know? There's a lot of questioning about that. I don't think there's much questioning about client therapist relationship. I think it's very clear, maybe on these roles on like a medical role. So I go to your practice, you help me, maybe like this understanding of, you know, what is wrong with me and you're going to help me. And once our work is over in therapy, our relationship is over as well. So I don't see that as a usual questioning that people have in Ecuador, at least. Now, talking about my experience working with children are understanding now even more what a psychologist is and what do they do. So they know what therapy is, and it's amazing to see them doing that. And I don't think children think beyond the therapy space. So it's like, even it's funny, children think I live there, which I also tell them, like, this is not my home. I don't sleep here. I have my own things. When they see me outside the practice, it's like something very surprising for them. It's funny, but I think let's talk about like adults. And from my experience as a client, or from my experiences as, let's say, friends or family, I think people have it very clear. What are the boundaries and limits from the client therapist relationship? Like I'm saying, like from a medical role. So nobody's questioning like the doctor patient relationship. And I think it's pretty much the same with psychologists. Of course, there's people like going on your boundaries, like, hey, can I have an appointment on Sunday? Or hey, can I call you and it's 10 p.m.? Well, that's not going to happen. But people, I think, have it very clear.
Is supervision a must for a therapist in your country?
So it is a little ambiguous, I think. It is a must. But as I told you before, there's no organization or institution that maintains a clear perspective on supervision. I would say from my experience that to get a certification for any specific psychological approach, like if you want to do psychodynamic or CBT, or you want to do humanistic, whatever you want to do, in that certification, schools are very well organized and well structured, and they do have supervision as a must. But if you are working independently, I think it really comes up to your work ethics. So individually, if you're not part of any school, ethically, you can choose to find some supervision spaces or places or communities to do that. But they do teach us that in school. But once again, there's no organization that is regulating that a psychotherapist with this ID number is doing any amount of clinical supervision hours.
And the majority psychologists / therapists choose to have a supervision in that case?
I think so. I want to think optimistically, and I think people do choose to have supervision. Like I'm saying, from my experience, I am a little bit more oriented to the like psychoanalytical school, and the psychoanalytical school is very structured in supervision. So you have to have supervision, even though you're just attending seminars or just attending some lectures. Supervision is always one thing that psychoanalysts tell you have to do. So yes, in my experience, it is a must. It is something that I do. It is something that I advise other psychotherapists to do, of course. But I think it depends a lot on, like I'm saying, the schools or approaches they have and work ethics at the end.
What are the most common complaints that the client comes to therapy for?
I think this one is easy. Since I work with children and families, the most common concern that parents have, and the reason they bring their kids to therapy, is to help their children cope with parent separation or divorce. I have a lot of cases with moms bringing their kids with this separation story or divorce story with the parent, with the dad of the kid, and this kid is having a really hard time relating and having a relationship, a healthy relationship with the dad. Usually, it's a lot of moms bringing their kids. Like motivating and trying to help their kids into having a relationship with the dad. It depends on the case, of course, but I would say pretty much most of the times that the dad kind of disappears in a way. So moms have a lot of anxiety and a lot of regret and a lot of guilt about how my kid is going to grow up without this figure, without the dad. And the other one is, I think, a lot of anxious parents and trying to understand their kids' behavior. So either the kid is having a hard time in school or a hard time in their primary bonds, or either having a hard time with understanding their emotions. There's a lot of parents that bring children to therapy just for them to have a space, a safe and secure space to play and to talk about their feelings. And if I think about adults, from again my experience, from what I see around me, I would say the most common complaint is, how can I say, traumatized adults trying to fix or trying to heal their inner child, working on their relationship with their parents. It's interesting thinking about the Ecuadorian society as a violent society, as a society that mistreats children a lot, and then you get these adults trying to fix that when they grow up. So I would say that's one of the most common complaints from adults.
And what would you say, what is this trauma that they are trying to heal from?
I think it's the paradoxic idea of my mom loved me, but at the same time hitting me, mistreating me, telling me words, telling me I am not enough, telling me any kind of verbal or physical abuse, actually. So I think the trauma is abuse at the end.
If you would share one tool, belief, or approach that is a must-have for you as a therapist, what would that be?
I think I'm going to connect this one to the other question about children in parent relationship, and I cannot stop emphasizing the importance of a healthy parent-children relationship. Of course, as a children psychotherapist, I work directly with that, with building that kind of healthy relationship without the trauma, without the hitting, without the abuse, without the violence. And even though when I work with parents or adults, it's the same. Even though I'm not working with children all the time, I do think one belief is that what happens in a children's life, it's determining how a child behaves, how they see themselves, how they relate to other kids, to other people, how they are going to build adult relationships when they grow up. So it's the importance and intention of building very healthy children-parent relationships.